Okay, so I am back with another recap of Netflix series Ratched, Season 1, Episode 3, Angel of Mercy. So what do we find out in Episode 2, Ice Pick? We found out that Dr. Hanover is a crackhead. We found out that Nurse Bucket is petty, but I'm like, who could feel bad for Nurse Ratched? And we find out that Father Andrew has been neutralized at this point. She did the lobotomy, and he's no longer a viable witness for the state against Tolson for the massacre of the 4 priests. So let's see what we are going to find out in today's episode. So if you're interested in hearing what I have to say, stay tuned. Okay, so we found out that not only is Dr. Hanover an addict, he's also Joanne the scammer. Okay, so let's get into this. Okay, so the guy that Nurse Ratched met outside of the hotel, the guy that she did this whole weird role-playing thing with, okay, his name is Charles, and we find out that Charles, where I once thought he was a reporter, he's actually an investigator for a woman called Mrs. Osgood, played by Sharon Stone. Now, Sharon Stone has hired Charles to find Dr. Hanover because Dr. Hanover performed a treatment on her son that had detrimental consequences, okay? And so what we find out is that Dr. Hanover isn't actually Dr. Hanover. His real name is Dr. Manuel Banga, something to that effect. And he changed his name, obviously, to avoid being found by Mrs. Osgood. And that also makes sense because in the episode where the governor came out and the press was there taking pictures, he was like, I just don't want to be photographed. And he said that several times in the episode. And so I thought that, oh, okay, he's just, he just wants to do his job, but he's just this dedicated doctor. But no, he's in hiding pretty much. Okay, so Charles tells her that he's found Dr. Manuel Bagna, aka Dr. Hanover, and that he's working at Lucia State Hospital as the head doctor, and he already has a governor in his pocket. And basically, Mrs. Osgood was like, okay, I'll give you $250,000 to bring me his head for what he did to my son. And so Charles, who is kind of taken aback, he agreed to do it, but you could also see in his face like, okay, because she actually wants him to decapitate Dr. Hanover and actually physically bring her his head, right? And so, but he agrees to do it. And so, and the next thing you see, Mrs. Osgood going to see her son, and so we see the ramifications of whatever treatment that Dr. Hanover, aka Dr. Manuel Dr. Manuel performed. And so he has his food tray there, and she's going through and saying, okay, so what's for dinner? Like she's playing this game with him, and all he's interested in is what's for dessert. And she, is basically telling him that, I guess she's trying to tell him that, no, you need to have some regular food too. And that's when you get to see that he has no arms or legs. They've been amputated. And so it's like, oh, snap. Okay, so what did Dr. Hanover / Dr. Manuel do to Mrs. Osgood's son? Okay, so we're at the hospital, and Nurse Bucket is in the office. Dr. Hanover wanted to talk to her. She came in because remember in the last episode, he just snapped on her because she got sick during that lobotomy procedure he was performing, and he just basically yelled at her and threw her out. And so now she's walking in, and she is holding flowers, and he's like, well, what is that smell? And she was like, well, your office smells kind of damp sometimes, and so I just thought I would bring these flowers in and kind of liven the place up. And he was like, oh, it smells like a whorehouse in Manila. And she was like, oh, okay. So he's still Dr. Hanover gets on my nerves, okay, at this point. But he's telling her that he has this new treatment that he wants. He found out that the lobotomy didn't work to correct the lesbianism in Mrs. Cartwright and Mrs. Blix. And he was like, well, that's probably because I didn't have all the information, and so the treatment probably made things worse. And so we're going to go a different route with them, okay? And he wants her to oversee the treatment. Okay, so the next thing you see Nurse Ratched, she goes into Mrs. Cartwright, which is the younger woman's room, to get her, and she sees she's reading a book, and she asks her about the book she's reading, and apparently she said the title. I didn't write the title down, but Nurse Ratched took the book and was like, well, this is a very sensual, I guess, like sexually suggestive book, and in your state, this is not a good thing for you to read. So she ends up taking her book, and she's like, well, I'm also here to take you to treatment. So now they're wheeling her to treatment. So it's her and one of the orderlies, I think his name is Finnegan. And so Nurse Ratched is like, well, what kind of treatment? How am I supposed to treat the patients if I don't know what's going on? And so Finnegan was like, well, you're not administering the treatments. Nurse Bucket is. So they get into the room, and Nurse Ratched feels some kind of way because she, feel like at this point she should be Dr. Hanover's right-hand man. And she started asking questions like, what is this all about? And so, of course, Nurse Bucket is like, well, this is a treatment that Dr. Hanover has asked me to oversee, and that's going to be the last question you ask. I just need you to do what I'm asking you to do. Okay, so they have two tubs there. The one tub, you can see like steam coming off the water, and Nurse Bucket wanted Miss Cartwright to get into the water. She was like, oh, it looks kind of hot. She's like, oh, it's only 90 something degrees. It's the average temperature. So they get her into the tub, and then she tells Finnegan and Nurse Ratched to close the lid. And so now they're like, okay, what's going on? And so once she got into the tub, once she's had her locked in the daggone tub, she's now, so part of the treatment is that I'm going to turn the temperature up. So she turns the temperature up to 119 degrees. This water is boiling this woman. Nurse Ratched and Finnegan are like, what the hell is going on? What are you doing? Why are you doing this? It got to the point where she was, screaming so bad they wanted to let her out. And she basically told her, no, this is Dr. Hanover's treatment. Don't interfere. Just do what I tell you to do. So while this is going on, so they go through the process. Finnegan is really taken aback on this. He doesn't want to do this, but Finnegan is very badly injured. He fought in the war, and he has some very severe facial injuries. And Nurse Bucket snaps at him like, if you want to keep questioning me, you can go ahead. I'm going to fire your ass, and looking the way you look, it's going to be very difficult for you to find employment elsewhere. So just shut up and do what I'm asking you to do. And I'm like, oh wow, okay. So I know Nurse Bucket is crazy too, but I don't know. That was just kind of a shock that she snapped like that. But I guess her whole thing is she's trying to get back into Dr. Hanover's good graces, and so she's like, I don't want nobody to interfere with what it is that he has. What he has going on, and what he's asking me to do. That's what I'm going to do. So just shut up and just roll with it. So she's like, she's supposed to do this for 20 minutes. And then the woman was like, it's too hot. And so she looked at the paper. She was like, oh, it actually is supposed to be 117 degrees. So, it is too hot. So she goes to turn the thing down, and they're standing there watching this woman suffer and boil in this damn water. So the 20 minutes are up, and they open the doors, and you can see this woman is beet red from head to toe from that heat. Like, she was literally boiling in this water. And they're helping her to trying to get her out of the tub, and they're like, oh my gosh, she's burning up. And she said, oh, so that's why we have this ice bath here. So that was the second tub, is filled with ice water. So now they're like, are you kidding me? Are you really going to do this? And she basically snaps on them. But then again, yes, put her in the water, stop questioning me, do what I asked you to do. So they dumps her in this water, and you can just see this woman is suffering, right? And like, she has to do this for 5 minutes. And you can almost see a hint of concern in Nurse Bucket's face. Like, you can kind of tell she knew that this wasn't right and this woman was suffering. But at the same time, she's in love with Dr. Hanover, and she's doing what he's telling. That's her justification. She's doing what he's telling her to do. Okay, so we go to Miss Briggs. She wakes up. there's this black guy next to her. I'm like, okay, who's this man's in 1947s, in the 1940s? Who's this black man in bed with this white woman? And so, that's her husband. And so she got upset because he had turned off her alarm or reset it or something, and she woke up later than she expected. And she's like, I have a meeting with the governor and I'm going to be late. And he's like, no, you're not going to be late. And he's also homosexual. So it's a marriage of convenience. They have their marriage, because, you know, the times you expect people to get married, but they also allow each other to have their own lives away from each other. And so she goes to the office and she's talking with the governor and she's congratulating him on, you know, the great work he did and the publicity, if I can get that word out, the publicity and all that, you know, everything went off without a hitch. And then he sees the clipping of Nurse Ratched, and he's like kind of infatuated with Nurse Ratched. And so of course Miss Briggs is like, okay. And so then he starts talking about Tolson, and he's like, he wants Hanover to sentence. He wants Hanover to give them the information they need to sentence Tolson to death. And of course, Miss Briggs is like, well, I don't know if that's necessarily the right strategy. And he's basically like, you heard what I said. I said what I said. If he wants this funding, basically he's going to do what I asked him to do, which is to give me the information that we need so that we can go ahead and execute this murderer. Like, you can't go around just murdering priests, and I don't want to be seen as being soft on crime. So again, he's a politician. So she basically is like, oh, okay. So she walks out of the office. So Nurse Dolly, the nurse that the younger nurse, I couldn't remember her name. For whatever reason, instead of Dr. Hanover taking Tolson his food, Nurse Dolly takes the food. So there's actually a security guard downstairs. He has a desk there, and so the security guard is questioning her, like, why are you coming? Why didn't Nurse Dr. Hanover come? He usually brings the food. This is a dangerous man. You shouldn't be going back there. And so he eventually lets her in, and this dumb wench. So she takes him, like, she's infatuated with this guy. I don't know if she thinks this bad boy. She's just young and ignorant, right? So she's attracted to him, this dangerous man, right? So they start talking. And he starts talking about how attractive she is, and, you know, his food and his vitamins, and how the vitamins he's taking is having these type of having this particular side effect that's causing him to have this erection that he's had for a couple of days, and that he needs help. And so she ends up jacking this man off. And then as she was walking out, she was like, well, you just remember to keep taking those vitamins. So as she's walking out, now the security guard is a stone's throw away, so he can hear all of this stuff going on. So as she was leaving, the next thing we see is Finnegan going up to Nurse Ratched and basically telling him what the security guard witnessed. So that Nurse Dolly masturbated Tolson. So she's obviously upset and basically like, you know what, I'll deal with this. And so she walks off. So Tolson is at the gas station waiting in the full service lane, and the guy's pumping his gas, and next thing you hear, this man says, oh my god, and he runs away. And then next thing Tolson looks up in his rearview mirror, there's a guy with the gun pointed at him. He's shooting at him. He tries to kill Tolson, and then next thing you know, there's a high-speed chase ensues, and Hanover gets away. The guy that was trying to shoot him was, of course, Charles, but of course he doesn't know that at this point. So back at the hotel, Nurse Ratched goes up to the front desk. I should know this woman's name. She's been in so many daggone movies, but for some reason, the woman who owns and runs the hotel, she has a message. The message just basically says, "Let's try again." And so it's Charles saying that he wants to, I guess, give this whole role playing thing another try. Okay, so the next thing we see is Charles. He comes to the room, and this time it's a different story. Now he's this young Marine who is, all he can think about is this sweetheart back home. I forget where they are, and he ends up being injured, and she ends up having to amputate his leg, and it's this whole story. And then while she's telling the story, there are these flashbacks and of her, helping the soldier, and then next thing you know, in the end, they end up having sex, and she ends up kissing a woman who looks from behind, because you only saw the one from behind who looks like Mrs. Briggs, but I don't know if it's just her, her fantasy of this fantasy that she has, and she's just inserting Mrs. Briggs, but it looked from behind, it looks like Mrs. Briggs. Okay. And so they, talk a little bit, and then before he walks out, he ends up telling her that she was the worst lay that he's ever had, and that how weird she is. And then he walks out, and she's just sitting on the bed. And I'm like, well, I guess she would be, because she's not into Pinterest. She's into women, but she just hasn't, hasn't realized that as of yet. And like, she's not really into you. She's just not that into you. Okay, or people with your equipment. So, okay, fine. So Biggs and her husband, they're sitting down to dinner. And he's telling her that there's this other couple. It's his boss. He's actually a lawyer. He's a partner in the law firm. And they asked, them to go with them to Napa for the weekend. And she doesn't want to go. Partly because I guess whatever, she has going with the governor. But she's still trying to figure out. She has a thing for Nurse Ratched. Okay. And so what she ends up telling her husband is that she can no longer do this. That she can no longer stay in this marriage, that she has feelings for somebody else. And he basically said that, this is a bad move. We allow each other, we're able to, have, our marriage and still, have our lives separate. And her whole thing is she's tired. She doesn't want to live a lie anymore. She just want to be with who she wants to be with. And that's Nurse Ratched. He basically said that this is, it's going to be bad for our careers. Our marriage has benefited both of us in a lot of ways. And so an ending can also have a detrimental effect. And I just feel like you should think about this before you make that decision. And I feel like you owe me at least that. And so he got up from the table and, went on to take his baths. And so she's kind of sitting there, and you can see she's kind of, she's trying to work through things. So Dr. Hanover has made it back to his office, and Nurse Bucket walks in and is like, oh my God, what happened? Because she can see that his car has been shot out and shot up, and his window has been shattered and all that. And he makes up a story saying that, oh, it's just some kids and some rocks and and she was telling him that, oh, do you want me to let, the security know, whatever, just in case those hooligans come back? And then he's like, no, it's not a big deal. And then she starts telling him about the treatment, how Mrs. Cartwright's treatment has been successful, and how she's about to start on Mrs. Blick's treatment. And he's like, yeah, I want you to continue to do this treatment for another 2 months, And then she says, so we're getting calls about Mr. Dario. Mr. Dario is Salvatore, the guy that slit his throat in Dr. Hanover's office. She's coming to the realization that he is now missing. His family has been calling. She's telling him that, he left. We thought that he went home. And now Hanover, you can see, is kind of getting kind of nervous. Like, I don't really know. Like, his niece is saying that they haven't been able to find him or locate him. They haven't spoken to him. And then Nurse Ratched walks in and says, basically saying that her and Dr. Hanover have a dinner date. And so, of course, Nurse Bucket is like, what? What are you talking about? And so, Dr. Hanover was like, oh, yes, that's right. So we're going to have to leave soon. So Nurse Bucket is basically like, she feels like Nurse Ratched is disrespectful and that she needs to know her place. And she was basically like, I don't know what you got going on here, but I was going to find out. I'm definitely going to find out. And so Nurse Ratched basically said, I have this great place. Do you want to go? We can go. She eventually really asked him out, like, do you really want to go out and have dinner? So they do go out to dinner, and she ends up taking him, I think, to the same spot that Miss Biggs took her when they had the oysters. And so she was like, she just asked him, like, why is this person after you? And he's like, what? He said, there's clearly somebody after you. What's going on? And he's like, he started talking about how he's done, he did something terrible in his past. She was like, well, we've all done things in our past. We've all made bad decisions. She started talking to him about Mr. Dario. Like, we both, played a hand in covering that up. Actually, she played more of a hand because she, basically put the knife in his hand. But we're both, in this, when it comes to Mr. Dario. It said, don't you think that if there's anybody in this place, in the hospital, that you can trust, it should be me. And so then he goes into the backstory of Mrs. Osgood. So Mrs. Osgood actually brought him in to treat her son for he had pickerism or something. Somewhere they get sexual pleasure out of stabbing people, like cutting flesh or something. And he had like stuck his mom a couple of times. He had stuck one of the I guess, I don't know if that was one of the cooks or the maids in the house. He ended up stabbing the gardener. Like, it had gotten so bad, and so it started to progress to the point where she felt like, okay, we need to get him help. And so he was starting his treatment. So he decided he was going to use acid as a form of therapy. I don't know why, but he decided he was going to use acid as a form of therapy. And so he's sitting down with him. Miss Osgood left for the day, and he's sitting down with the son, and he had this glass of water. He put a few drops of it in his water, and so the son was like, well, I'll only take it if you take it. And so, he's, was going to play along. He, put a couple of drops in his glass too, but when he turned his back to get, I guess, the notepad or whatever he was trying to get out of his bag, the son grabbed the vial, poured the entire bottle in Dr. Hanover / Dr. Manuel's glass. Of course, Dr. Emanuel didn't know that, and so when they decided to go ahead and drink, he drank some of the acid. And so he went on, they both went on this trip. Obviously, Dr. Hanover was a lot more trippy because he had a larger dose. And so you can see him, he's kind of going to, like, twirling around, I guess, doing what people who's on acid do, they're tripping. And so the next thing you know, the son, he's talking about how his arms are not his arms, and that he wants to take his arms off and he wants somebody else's arms and all this kind of stuff. And so he's saying the son left. He said he seemed like he was gone for what seemed like forever. And when he came back, he was covered in blood and had 2 arms in his hand. He was like, I knew that he had killed the gardener. So he had killed the gardener and took the gardener's arms off, right? And came in, and he wanted Dr. Hanover to sew the gardener's arms onto his. And so he actually managed to cut off one of his arms. He severely damaged the other arm. Dr. Hanover is now terrified. He's like, he doesn't really know what to do. He's like, I didn't have the equipment to really treat him, but I was trying to focus on trying to stop the bleeding because I didn't want him to die. And so he ends up sewing the gardener arm onto this child's arm. And he was like, I knew it wasn't going to work. I just was working with what I had. I wasn't able to do the muscles and the bones and all that. I knew that the limb would not, survive. And so he did that, and he said he was just MIA. He dipped out. He was gone. And he said the last he heard, sepsis set in. Obviously, the limbs died, and unfortunately, the sepsis spread to his legs as well, and that's why he lost his legs as well. And so he's like, Mrs. Osgood has it out for me, and I don't think she's ever going to stop. And that's what's going on right now. And so so Nurse Ratched was like, okay, we're going to have to find a way to make Mrs. Osgood back off, and I think I know the perfect way. And so that's how this episode ends. So Dr. Osgood is not only a drug addict, he's also, like I say, a scammer. He went and got involved with people. Now, granted, it wasn't his fault that happened. But at the same time, it's 1947. You got this white kid who's injured, and you got this colored Asian man who's like, I mean, I don't know. It was just a bad situation all around. It was just a horrible situation all the way around. But in the end, it wasn't really Dr. Osgood's fault. Her son maimed himself. Now, granted, had Dr. Osgood just gotten him the help that he needed instead of that whole makeshift surgery on his bedroom floor. Okay, granted, he would have probably still have his legs. He probably, his arms would have had to go, but he would have still had his legs. But it is what it is. So now we understand why Dr. Hanover is so like hush hush and like, no, I don't like being photographed. So I'm going to end this here, and I will talk to you guys later.